Welcome to the Farm to School podcast, where you will hear stories of how youth thrive and farmers prosper when we learn how to grow, cook, and eat delicious, nutritious local foods in schools across the country
and the world. We're your hosts. I'm Rick Sherman.
Hey, and I'm Michelle Marcestein, and we are so excited. We have two amazing, wonderful guests with us today from an organization called Sustained Farms in Denver, Colorado. And they work with about 30 schools in the largest district in Colorado to bring gardening, nutrition, sustainability, and food justice programming to students.
Yes, welcome to the program. We have Matt Supronowicz and Maya McDowell. Welcome, you guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
Okay.
Yeah, we're happy to be here.
If you could tell us, Sustained Farms, I got your website on there, and we'll have all that links to your website and what you do in our show notes. Tell us about your journey. How did you get started in this field, and how did that come about? And also, while you're thinking about that, wanted to kind of prompt you on the website. Matt's origin story was on there. Wouldn't it be cool if there was an organization that provided locally grown food and experiential education focused on sustainability and helped maintain and support school gardens? On top of that, what if the food went to the families that really needed it?
Yeah, I mean, I can start us off. So I am the co-founder of Sustained Farms, and we founded in 2018, but I think some of my work around school gardens started well before that. And me and my co-founder, we were Teacher America Corps members in Oklahoma, actually. And we had an advisory class. I had 11th graders. Honestly, there wasn't any curriculum or anything to do with that 40 minutes a day. So you were kind of making it up as you went along. And I wrote a grant for $300 to build some garden beds because I said, this will be fun for my 11th graders to do. So we got the grant from the Alumni Foundation, and we built those garden beds, and we had a local nursery donate like 4 trays of broccoli. That's the only thing we grew the first year. I remember students looking at that broccoli and saying, I really thought broccoli grew on trees. And these were 11th grade students because each little broccoli looks like a tree. We're shocked to see how it was growing. And I had a moment of realization at that time that, yes, that's so funny and cute that a student says something like that. But that when the students that were in my class lived in North Tulsa, and there wasn't access to a grocery store at that time. And the majority of their grocery shopping at families was done at Dollar General. And what produce they had was largely canned food. And so when I thought about that after going home that night, I kept thinking there's a reason why someone wouldn't know how broccoli grows, not just because they don't have access to a farm, but they might not even have access to see it in a produce aisle at a grocery store. And, fast forward, I ended up moving to Colorado, and I became really passionate about this idea of what does gardening in school look like, and how do we integrate that into adolescence? And I was working on a school that actually had a 1-acre farm, but it ended up being in a more affluent area. And I was seeing students really engage with farm work and grow amazing and awesome produce that went to the cafeteria. But there was such a surplus that all that food that was extra ended up going right back into the compost pile. And so, pounds and pounds of produce was going right back into the compost pile. And I got to this point where I was like, I want to move back to Denver and think about, what does this look like in a more urban setting? And I recognize that a lot of folks in agriculture are really focused on growing food and getting it to people, but don't always have the teacher knowledge or the educational skills to be able to engage a class. In Denver, I've had classrooms of 35 students plus, depending on, whether it was before or after October count. And so can someone have the skills to actually engage those students? And I got frustrated, and I said, we need an organization that does all of these things, that builds capacity for teachers in schools so that we can maintain garden spaces, but that has staff that comes in and knows how to work with diverse groups of students and large groups of students. And that really is making sure that the produce that's grown on school gardens and farms is getting back into the hands of the kids and families in schools that need it the most. But I don't know, Maya joined our team in the past 3 years and has been such an influential part. I'm wondering, what's your origin and how does Sustained Farms stick out to you in your career?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the manager of operations and programs here at Sustained Farms. And as Matt mentioned, I've been here for a few years now. I've got a background in youth development and food justice, respectively. And so Sustained Farms was really kind of the perfect opportunity for combining those two passions that I have. I've done a lot of work in policy as it regards to food and emergency food assistance. And so after dealing with, frankly, a little bit of post-COVID burnout because, need is so very high.
Mm-hmm.
I stumbled upon Sustained Farms and found that there's really a lot of space for joy and early intervention when it comes to food justice. And I'm just super proud of our impact. We work with schools. We tend to focus on schools that have 70% or higher BIPOC students population. We focus on Title I schools and schools that are proximate to food deserts. And so just in 2024, we grew about 4,000 pounds of food across all of our school sites and served 9,000 unique students. And so tremendous impact for a small but mighty organization. I'm really happy to be here.
That is so amazing. Like it's incredible what kind of engagement you can do. And I'm so curious, you mentioned food justice. What does food justice mean to you?
Excellent question. And I giggle because we're in the midst of hosting a food justice enrichment for our middle school students. It's kind of like an elective that they can opt into. And what I tell our middle school students when we start this class with them is food justice at its very basic definition is just the belief and understanding that all people deserve access to healthy, culturally relevant food in their communities. And so at its baseline, one would think that would be easy to agree upon, but it actually takes a lot of policy and work and organizing to make that a reality for people.
Another kind of follow-up question I had, you're in Colorado. We got that picture, how Matt came from Oklahoma to Colorado. We kind of have a connection to Colorado. I lived in Colorado Springs for a few years, a long time ago. This was 30 years ago.
Yeah, Rick and I didn't know we'd both lived in Colorado until right before we talked to you.
Wow.
And where did you live, Michelle?
Outside of Leadville, up on Mount Albert. It was I moved out of my parents' home when I was 17 and went to the BLM to do trail crew up Mount Albert.
So we bring that up to you guys because we're familiar with Colorado, but can you tell us how is it different running a school garden operation in Colorado compared to maybe some other places in the country?
Sure, I can take this one. So you both lived here, and so you might be well aware that Colorado does have a proud agricultural legacy. We grow everything from corn to sugar beets, the famous Palisade peaches, and so as it pertains to farm to school, we do have a House bill that was passed a few years ago that offers reimbursements for local food purchasing. But as you might know, Colorado has a really varied landscape. And so you've got plains and mountains and urban city centers. So for Sustained Farms, we're hyper local to Denver because the needs of Denver schools are really different than, what might be necessary at some of the mountain schools or what might grow out in the plains. Denver has a pretty high percentage of food deserts, surprisingly. And so if students aren't able to connect to that agricultural legacy that I talked about, because they've never seen tomatoes growing or helped anything to grow, how likely are they to eat that food? We really find that those hands-on experiences in school gardens can contribute to lifelong love of nature and willingness to try new foods and just be more of an active participant in your health. So that early intervention is really important.
I was just going to say, I think one of the things we're really proud of, even in Denver, is just celebrating the different Colorado produce that we have across the state. We've been partnering with Denver Public Schools Food and Nutrition Services, and this year we were very integral to the Colorado Proud School Meal Day, where it's a day where we just celebrate Colorado produce. And so every item on a student's menu is grown in Colorado and based in that. And then we designed garden programming, specifically nutrition programming, where students were able to kind of like combine and match and understand what are the produce that we're growing in our garden that matches what exists in Colorado, but also in their cafeteria. And so it's super exciting work that's happening when we think about, not just Denver, but what's happening across the state with produce and farm to school.
But yeah, I got to think your growing season is a lot shorter than a lot of the countries too. It's so like right now as we speak, of course it's the winter, but it seems like your winter lasts forever at times, right?
Absolutely.
It sure does. It feels that way right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our growing season is short, and sometimes when I travel to other places, I'm immensely jealous of the longer growing seasons you all have. But we do what we can with our few months of
because you're the Mile High City, right?
Yeah.
You're over 5,000 foot elevation.
I think what's a little bit different for like us is, we have to maintain that garden site over the summer because students don't get access to it in the same way. If we're only planting in April and May, we have those 2 months, and then, sometimes we get frost in September even. So we like to think that we can do programming through November, but if we're not maintaining that learning site over the summer months, we really lose it in the fall because our season's so short. So it's an essential work that we do is to like maintain those school garden sites over the summer to make sure that they're actually living classrooms for when students return in August.
It says on your website that you maintain a life cycle of a school garden without adding additional pressure to school staff. Wondering what you mean by that. And you mentioned sustainability, and I'm wondering how sustainable is your operation? Like if you were to leave, would the gardens continue to go, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're really passionate about is when we partner with a school, that we remain a partner with that school for as long as they want us. And so our idea is that, when we are an integral and connected part of the school, so that we're building capacity. And so I know this from my own literal experience. I started a chicken coop at one of the middle schools I was working with. And, the summer, your teacher contract ends, but it's like, well, the chickens still need to be fed and watered. And so I, as a teacher, was going, multiple times a week to make sure that our animals were alive on our little urban garden. And it was like, how is this fair or right that like I choose to do this myself so that my students have this neat learning opportunity? I wanted there to be an organization that could help build my capacity so that I could, I was a literacy teacher. And so focus on what are my reading and writing curriculums and how am I intentionally tying the garden to that. But I wanted to be extended in a way that felt respectful to me and valued my time as well. And so I think Sustained Farms is not about replacing anything. It's about adding something to a school. And so many schools that we talk about, it's just the idea of like maintaining a school garden over the summer is so exhausting for them to try to solve. And for us to be like, yeah, we got that. And then we're also going to make sure that our staff are trained just like teachers would. They know how to engage a class. For our elementary program, we take a full class out and we ask that the teacher is simply a participant with those students. And so when we run through our lessons, our staff truly takes the lead and knows how to engage a full classroom of people. And so I think the idea about sustainability is a hard one in that, because I think our model is slightly different, that we really want to make sure that we're building capacity. Do I think that many of the schools, if we were to say like, yeah, we no longer can support you, could take up those reins and build internal capacity? Yes, but that would never be our goal. We want to make sure that we are a real institution. And that's one of the reasons that we have like limited our bounds to Denver, is that we're really focusing on our Denver schools.
Well, that was a really succinct example of building capacity. I'm wondering if you have some other examples of what does that mean to build capacity?
Yeah, I think another example of that is at our middle schools, we have electives. And so, at Denver Green School Northfield, for instance, if you don't want to take PE as a sixth grader or to take music or art, you can literally take gardening. And the same thing is like with some of our enrichments, depending on the schools, they're all set up a little bit different. But the idea that like we can provide and lead an additional elective or enrichment that the school doesn't need to train a teacher on, doesn't need to build within, but that gives schools more opportunities for student leadership and for student autonomy to lead into the things that they're passionate about as they continue to increase. And so I think that's another example of like, yeah, we're doing that. I think another one might be right now we harvest all of the food at the gardens, and we distribute some of that food to neighboring food pantries and food banks. And so we're doing that harvesting, and then we're doing that like delivery system. So schools aren't worried about like food falling off the vine and not actually getting to people. We're taking care of that. And then we also have plans this season. We're going to be planting the 10 most used crops in our cafeterias. And so those specific crops, then we're going to be taking to those cafeterias and helping to get them right into school cafeterias. So we're not asking, cafeteria staff to go out and harvest or to go pick up, but we're actually taking that on and doing that ourselves.
What are some of those off the top of your head, those 10 most used crops?
So, 3 of them are different varieties of tomatoes. They get used quite a bit. Snack peppers are another one. Different melon varieties. So honeydew, cantaloupe, watermelon are varieties that get used quite a bit. What else am I forgetting, Maya?
Our students love snap peas. Those are highly snackable items, and we're going to be really excited to see those in their school garden and in the cafeteria.
Okay. So you're coordinating with the district, the Office of Sustainability, and individual schools. How is your work funded?
Yeah, so I think we're really, really proud of our partnership with Office of Sustainability, which is a district, department. And they fund about 50% of our programming, which we're really, really proud of that work. And then, I don't know, I'm always someone that skin in the game is super important. So for our Title I schools, because the district contributes about 50%, we then fundraise through grants and through other methods to make sure that a Title I school does not necessarily have to pay any extra out of a discretionary budget for base level services. If they want to add tons and tons of stuff, they might do some independent fundraising to get on that. If a school isn't a Title I school, we sometimes partner with a PTA or a neighborhood organization to make sure that there's some money coming to help supplement that. But we're really proud of the work and the investment that the district has in working towards garden education. They have a climate action plan right now. By 2028, they're trying to do a lot of different things. But one of them is making sure that 100 gardens are activated across our about 200 schools, and that they're growing 100 pounds of food that gets back to our community, but that the students at those schools have access to regular garden sustainability education, but as well as nutrition education. And so that's kind of like what we're working on with them to kind of really work to achieve these goals. But I know that we're quite lucky. Not every school garden organization has like district support in this way. They have to go door to door. We did that when we were getting started, when we were just 15 schools or so. We went and made sure that the schools could secure some portion of a budget. But yeah, that's kind of how things operate right now.
So that's, you just mentioned the intersection of policy. Is that their wellness policy? Is it their district? Like which policy within the district are those goals situated?
It's their climate action plan.
Okay.
And I will say that the Denver Public Schools' climate action plan was a student-led effort. And so that is really exciting. A group of high school students came together and said, we want to see change. And so put together a climate action plan that focuses on reducing greenhouse gas emissions and conserving natural resources. Students are able to, I believe, get sort of a seal of climate literacy through the climate action plan. And so school gardens are just one sort of element of that. And the district has been able to support our work as we help them to uphold that student-led climate action plan. And so it's a really kind of symbiotic relationship there.
That's incredible. And as you're going along and, and trying different things and seeing what fits, have you come up with some recipes of success? Like how many staff per how many schools? I'm just wondering I didn't ask.
Yeah, I think one of my core recipes for success is just like a rejection of something canned. Like everything looks a little bit different. Every school looks a little different. Every school garden looks a little bit different. And what works for different communities, even across Denver, is just slightly different. And so I think for me, it's always a like, we have to avoid this like, Ford factory model of like churning things out, but creating space from a planning standpoint, but also an implementation standpoint to be able to differentiate to the unique needs. I think one of the other things that's like super important for us is small groups. And so when we have a classroom come out, sometimes we see 6 classes all at once, and it could be 5th grade down to 1st grade, kindergarten. And so when we think about that word differentiation, it's also like differentiation for our staff to learn that skill, to be able to take a base lesson, because we change our lessons every season. So to take a lesson and be able to differentiate to the developmental needs of an early childhood student all the way up to a 5th grade or a 6th grade student, that's different, but we can still learn some base level things. It's just the way that we deliver that might be shifting or changing. And when a classroom comes out, we usually divide into 2 groups. So we have 2 staff people there for a class, and then we switch. And so smaller groups of about 15 allow for our staff to really make quick connections with kiddos, and be able to deliver content in an engaging way. And then it keeps it lively for kids when they're going to multiple stations as well.
Okay. And thank you for all that. And you've painted a really good picture of what you do, how you've done it, how you got here. Now, I guess the last thing we have to say on our exit here is, what do you see for the future of Sustain Ed Farms? So where are you going to go from here? Are you going to stay pat? Are you going to expand? What?
I mean, our focus is on Denver, and right now there are 207 schools in Denver Public Schools, serves about 90,000 students. And so right now, when we have 40 gardens and are serving 9,000 students, we want to be able to work within DPS to continue to grow. Our plan with them goes through 2028, and I think we'll get to about 65 schools by 2028 or so, give or take. And then we just want to make sure that every single kiddo in Denver has the ability, the connection to education, but also to those garden spaces, so that they can become a leader within their own sustainable communities. And so our focus is on Denver, and we still have a ton of work to do within the system of Denver to make sure that our Denverites are ready to lead for our future.
We have 800 school gardens in Oregon that are a patchwork of different ways that they're managed and different things. And I was like, how would you approach that? Like, how would you recommend on a state level we would sustain our amazing network of school gardens?
That's a great question. And I think that one thing that I've learned while being at Sustain Ed Farms and doing this work is that we can't do it all alone. And so I think a first step is kind of finding out who all is doing this work. There are a lot of great organizations in Denver that might be more focused on community gardens, or might be more focused on food distribution. And what we do really well is the direct student education piece. And so finding out what different school gardens are looking for in a partnership, and really kind of tailoring your approach, and making sure that you're not trying to bite off more than you can chew, and you're not reinventing the wheel, and really being collaborative with other organizations and partners that are doing similar work.
Patchwork is pretty to me. Like, I like that lots of people are doing different things. I think when I look at like state policy or local policy, I as ED am thinking about funding a lot. But I think that making space for smaller organizations that are trying to do new things, we started with 2 schools and an operating budget of like $50,000 or something like that. I mean, it was really, really small, but like we couldn't tackle a lot of grants. There's caps and limits, especially because, the state wants to make sure that money's getting to people that have proven themselves. But I think that creating space to take risks and chances on people, I mean, we have grown to the size that we have because a lot of people took chances on us and saw our shared vision. And so I like very different levels of funding, and creating space for innovation, to connect and tie the patchwork together, I guess.
And we certainly do in Oregon. Michelle didn't, she did that as an open-ended question to be thought-provoking, but we certainly have a bunch of nonprofits here that do similar work that you're doing in Portland, down in the Rogue Valley, all over the place. I'd mention them, but I'd leave a bunch out. So I would just say, if you are in whatever neck of the country or the world you're at, to get on your computer and Google. You could go to the National Farm to School Network and see what farm to school looks like in your state, and they will list a lot of the nonprofits that do that kind of work and so you could get involved too. Right, Michelle?
Yeah, or your state farm to school network as well.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think SGSO is a great resource as well. Both Maya and I are very connected on there, and we love to support and hear about what other people are doing and help in whatever ways we can. So we're wildly passionate about this work, and we want to make sure that every kiddo has a school garden that they get to access.
Thanks for that. And I'll leave links to that in the show notes, but SGSO, School Garden Support Organization. Yeah, one of our besties up here.
And it's so amazing to hear your passion. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for creating the space to amplify the work.
And we'd like to thank everyone else for listening today. Farm to School was written, directed, and produced by Rick Sherman and Michelle Markiston with help from Leanne Locker of Oregon State University, and was made possible by a grant from the United States Department of Agriculture.
The content and ideas of the Farm to School podcast does not necessarily reflect the opinions of Oregon State University, Oregon Department of Education, and the United States Department of Agriculture. The USDA, Oregon Department of Ed, and Oregon State University are equal opportunity providers and employers.
Do you want to learn more about Farm to School? Check out our other episodes, show notes, and find our contact information and so much more. Just search Farm to School Podcast, OSU.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Stop by the website Michelle just mentioned and say hello, or please give us an idea for a future podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you,
Thanks,
Maya.
Matt and Maya, and thank you, everybody, for listening.
Thank you.
Happy growing.
Thank you again.